And with that, I'll leave the floor to Mac, who will introduce our speaker and talk a little bit more about Undersecretary Goldstein.
All right, so thank you all for coming today. My name is Mac Reeferson. I'm the treasurer of the Dartmouth Political Union, and I will be introducing our speaker, former Undersecretary of State Steve Goldstein, who has led a very impressive career in both the private and the public sectors. So in the private sector, Steve Goldstein has served as the former head of communications for the Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, and is also the former CCO of TIAA, which is a Fortune 100 financial services organization. And he brings with him an expertise in communications. He's also the current chief marketing officer of the long-term stock exchange. In the public sector, Mr. Goldstein has served as both a press secretary and chief of staff for multiple congresspeople. He has most recently served as the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs in the Trump administration. So with that, please welcome former Undersecretary of State Steve Goldstein.
I am very glad to be here. I'm pretty familiar with this area. My spouse and I have gone to a resort that's fairly close by for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to fly on Cape Air, wondering if I'll make it many times, including today when I flew in from Boston. My dad is 91, and I went to Florida last weekend, and then flew from Florida to Boston, and then down to here. So that was all sort of interesting. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end, and I'll answer whatever questions you have. And I've spoken to a number of universities, most in the UK, by the way, a lot of them, Edinburgh and many others, and a number of people afterwards have come up and said, can I get your email address, and can I ask you some questions later, or can you give me some help, and I'd be more than happy to do it. Very few people follow through, but those that do, they actually get the help. So we'll try to do what I can in that regard. So I think what I want to do is, I'd ask you to do two things. Number one, keep an open mind, because things are not always as you think they are. And secondly, think about what I'm saying and how it might relate to you and where you are politically and that type of thing. And in the end, all I want you to do is to take a stance on whatever issue you have. I'm respectful of whatever position you take. You need to vote. Voting is important. How you vote is totally up to you. But you should vote. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to serve your government, you need to vote, because on the form, you have to fill out whether you have actually voted or not. Now, they cannot go back and find out who you voted for or for whom you voted, but they can see whether you actually registered, and they can see whether you voted. And a number of people have been dismissed in many administrations for that same issue. So let me tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'll show you something which I think will maybe blow your mind and will make you look at me very differently. And then we'll go from there. So I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, country music capital of the United States. A lot of you have been there. Bachelorette capital of the United States right now. And the Parthenon, the only replica of the Parthenon outside of Athens, Greece. Great city, by the way. You like football, the Tennessee Titans, on and on. Left there, my parents were believers that we should leave Nashville and go away to school. I wanted to go to school in California. They wouldn't let me, so I went to Arizona. I went to Arizona because I wanted to make the tennis team. I basically played tennis for an entire semester. I literally had a tan that lasted for 10 years, I'm not joking. Unfortunately, I did not make the team because the coach, whose memory is instilled in my mind, said to me in a conversation a long time ago, "You're a really good tennis player for Tennessee, not so great for Arizona." Not exactly the best way to motivate somebody. And so, therefore, I had to move on from that and eventually graduated and taught school for a few years, moved back to Nashville, ended up working for a congressman that my father knew well, and I think, and then moved to Washington with him. I worked for 5 different members of Congress. This surprises a lot of people because they go, don't people hire people from the district? Most of the time, not as much as you would think. The one person that's always from the district is the receptionist. And the reason why is when you call, when someone from the district calls, they want that person to have an accent that's very similar to theirs. So But there's a professional staff that goes from Congress member to Congress member based on what they're sort of doing. So I worked for 5 members, the longest, Manuel Lujan. He later became Secretary of the Interior. I went over to work for him, running the public affairs shop, not having any idea what I was doing basically, and managed the staff. And we handled, our biggest issue was something you might have studied in school. You weren't alive during that period, but it was called Exxon Valdez, the tanker that went aground. And then also we had something called the spotted owl, the endangered species, that still exists to this day. The issues revolving endangered species. And offshore drilling off the state of California. Another issue which still exists to this day. And did that, moved to, Bush lost. And I moved to New York, didn't know anybody, went to a few bars to try to meet people, and everybody would say to me the same thing, why did you leave? And I realized people didn't really know too much about politics. And I said, well, I left because the president lost. But why would you have to leave? And so it dawned on me, and so anyway, I stopped using the line that I left. I just basically said I wanted to move to New York because that was sort of futile and I wasn't meeting anybody. And but the truth is, when you work for a presidential administration, you work for the administration. And every 4 years, when that administration's over, even if the president is reelected, you still have to submit your resignation. Because remember, the president is sworn in again, and then they have to they go through the process of reappointing you. You don't have to go through hearing again, but they go through the process of reappointing you. So I did that, and took a job running PR for the property casualty insurance industry, did that for a period of time, and then was hired to go run PR for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. I thought it was the greatest job of my life. It was like my dream job. I was on the masthead of the paper. I was excited about this. You know, you're around a lot of activity all the time. And I get a call one day, and I was told that Danny Pearl, our reporter, had been kidnapped. And there's a book about it called A Mighty Heart, and a movie about it too with Angelina Jolie. But basically, that was one of the first kidnappings to have occurred. I spent weeks trying to bring Danny back, along with my colleagues, and we could not. To tell you what it was like, we got 400 press calls a day in 2002. Think about that. That's not today. That's 18 years ago. And in the end, he was beheaded. It turned out several days after he was kidnapped, although we didn't know for many weeks. And I had to do what was really the toughest thing I ever had to do in my career, and maybe in my life, was I had to tell his parents that their son was no longer living and how he died. And the reason why I had to do that was because the New York Times reporter was going to print what happened, which was legitimate. And the reporter, who was phenomenal, I said, could you give me a couple of hours so I could tell the parents? So we had got a doctor to the house, we had others to the house, and I told their parents that their son was beheaded. And when I told them that, the people in the house told me that Mr. Pearl, who was an Iranian Jew, and Mrs. Pearl, who was an Iraqi Jew, they obviously screamed, as any parent would, and that he flicked Danny's head. Flicked his head like that in the picture. And then I had to go to a restaurant and eat dinner. Not very difficult, but not as difficult as what they had to face. And it changed me tremendously. Because up until that point, I thought I could solve every problem. I'm a big believer in the Harvard Negotiation Project, and you could refer to it as the Dartmouth Negotiation Project, or however you choose, since we're at Dartmouth. But basically, it's a book that's 80 pages, and it teaches you how to go from 1 to 10. Here's 1, here's 10, how do you get to 10? I actually believed we could bring him back. It never dawned on me that that wouldn't happen. It didn't dawn on me that there are people that wanted to kill other people. And there was nothing you could do to stop that. And so it changed my approach, and I sort of thought, what is my purpose now? You know, what am I really trying to do? I stayed there because we converted the paper from black and white to color. The Wall Street Journal used to be black and white for 100 years. And we had 9/11. That happened before Danny was kidnapped. And we published the next day. We won a Pulitzer Prize for publishing the next day, actually. And after we converted, I thought, I think it might be time to go. I thought I've done in like 20 months what a lot of people don't do in their whole career. And I was going to consult. So I consulted for McKinsey, did that for a number of months, not during the time Pete Buttigieg was there, but I did consult for McKinsey. And did that, and then I got offered to go to TIA, the big pension fund, Fortune 100 pension fund, as the chief communications officer. Did that for 7 or 8 years, went to AllianceBernstein for a couple years, and then I've spent the last few years working, advising startups, and now I work for a startup and help run a startup called Long-Term Stock Exchange, which is run by a guy named Eric Ries, who wrote a book that is famous in Silicon Valley called Lean Startup, which if you've studied startups and you've studied that book, I see this gentleman shaking his head. And Eric wrote about Long-Term Stock Exchange in his book. We've been approved by the SEC. We're going to launch in about 6 weeks. We're going to be a stock exchange just like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ is. You can go to ltse.com. We have certain standards that people have to meet, and I think this is very exciting. But let me go back to, I skipped that one point, and that was the point of the administration. So let me just show you this picture. And this is me. How did I actually become a citizen security? That is really the question. How did that occur? So let me just tell you how I got to join the Trump administration and about my exit from the Trump administration. And my view of politics and sort of how politics works, which might be a little different than you might think. And we can then stop and then we can go to the questions. So you have to start sort of, here's a person coming in with pizza, that's good. You have to start by sort of wondering, who am I? Why would they want me to be the Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy? So to you, I probably just look like, I don't know, to make myself feel good, a middle-aged guy, dressed in a blazer and gray pants and a blue shirt, who's not straight, who's from the South, who's Jewish, and who's a Republican. They don't have a lot of gay Southern Jewish Republicans. Especially people that have worked in previous administrations. And I'm proud of all 4 of those, by the way. So here's what happened. When Trump, I was not a never-Trumper. I didn't really support I didn't give money to any presidential candidate in 2018, 17 and 18. And I didn't support anyone, outwardly. So, but I also didn't oppose anyone. And I did vote for President Trump. And when President Trump won, I was asked if I would be interested in going back by someone I knew who was involved in the administration. And I said, I would consider it. I said, but I want a Senate-confirmed job. So in the political frame, there are not as many political jobs as you might think. There's 4,000, I think, jobs in the executive branch. You think how many people belong to the federal government? At Interior, when I was there were 70,000 employees, 125 were political. I don't know what the total is now, but so there are jobs that are Senate confirmed, called PAS, and there are jobs that are not Senate confirmed. So Senate confirmed is sort of the honorable, and you go through Senate hearings and so forth. And I said I wanted a Senate confirmed job, and I would be interested in 1 of 3 places. Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Public Affairs, because I'm not a stupid person, and people who have those jobs sometimes end up on airline boards getting to fly first class for the rest of their lives. Found it interesting anyway. At least I find out whether my plane was on time and why it was late or whatever. Treasury spokesperson, Assistant Secretary for Treasury. A lot of interest in that. And helping Betsy DeVos at education, because I have a big interest in that too, obviously. I taught school for 5 years. And I didn't hear a word. Then on January 20th, you all know what day that is? Inauguration Day. I'm sitting there in my apartment with my spouse, we're watching the inauguration. I get a call that night at 11. I can't go too much into that, but the person said, do you have a resume? And I said, I do. They said, what do you think about what you're seeing on television? I said, I don't understand why we're debating so much about the crowd size. We need to focus on the fact that we're starting this administration. And they said, send a resume. And I got off the phone, and I did what a lot of people do when they get very nervous. I probably ate quite a bit. And I called a friend of mine who worked for President Clinton, actually, and I said, she said, it's 11:40. I said, it's Inauguration Day, wake up. I said, I got to tell you what happened. I said, what do I do? What do I do? She goes, just wait, just let it sit for a bit. So I let it sit for a bit, eventually sent my resume, didn't hear a word. Not sure what that job was. Could speculate, but not sure what it was. And then I went about doing what I was normally doing, which was consulting. And then in April, I got a call from the Chief of Staff to the Secretary of State, whose husband I knew because he worked for me, but I did not know her well. I mean, I met her like a couple of times at spousal parties, you know, parties where people bring their spouses or partners, whomever they're with. And so she called me and she goes, would you be interested in being the Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs? And I said, sure, you know, I would be. Okay. She said, well, you're going to get a call from the Secretary of State's office, and they're going to ask you to come down and make sure you take that call. I said, well, you don't have to worry, I'm going to take the call. No, I'm serious. Make sure you take that call. So I got a call. This keeps going dark, so that's why I keep opening it up. So I got a call from the Secretary of State's office, and they said, sir, protocol is very heavy at the Department of State. Do you know the entire time I was there, I was never referred to by anything other than Mr. Undersecretary. I'd call somebody on the phone, and I'd go with Steve Goldstein, and they go, just a moment, Mr. Undersecretary. And you're never alone either, by the way. You're never alone. I learned something very interesting. I was talking to a person that worked for me, and there's 3,000 people that report to that job, by the way. And the budget's $1 billion, $1,100,000. And so I said, you know, I really don't feel well right now. I think I might need to rest a bit. He goes, well, our job is to keep you well while you're here. While you're here. So I thought, if I'm going to get really sick, now's the time to do it. The job is to keep me well. So the secretary, so I get this call from a woman who's a very nice woman named Emily, and she goes, sir, the Secretary of State would like to see you tomorrow, I think it was tomorrow, the next day, at 4:50. And I said, well, I don't know if I can make it at that time. And she goes, the Secretary of State would like to see you tomorrow at 4:50. I said, well, she goes, sir, the Secretary of State would like to see you at 4:50. I said, I'll be there. I said, can I ask you a quick question though? I've never been asked to go to an interview at 50 minutes after the hour. She goes, but today you are. It said 4:50 to 5:10. And I said, okay, sounds good. I figured he ran Exxon Valdez. He must have some idea of what he's talking about there. So I fly down. I go to the interview. We have a nice talk. He asked me a couple of questions. Interestingly, he asked me if I had a question, so I asked him one question. I said, there's an article in the paper, and John McCain, former Senator John McCain, he was current senator at the time, is sort of attacking you a little bit. Are you A, mad at your comms people because they didn't tell you in advance? B, furious with your government affairs people, in other words, the people that deal with the Hill, because they didn't tell you? Or C, you don't care. He goes, I don't care. I said, okay, well, that's good to know. And he asked me my view of metrics. And then at the end, I thought I'd try to keep it a little light. And I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, I think we're going to get along well. I'm from Tennessee, you're from Texas, Margaret, the Chief of Staff, from Alabama. And he goes, yeah, that's true. We all are from those two states. And I thought, well, that joke didn't go over quite so well. And he goes, I want to tell you one thing. Are you interested in this job? And I said, yes. He goes, don't tell a single person that you had this interview, and don't tell people that you're being considered for this job. Because you have to go through exhaustive clearance, and you might not get cleared. It could be a multitude of reasons. So you don't want to put yourself out there. And so I never told a single soul, except for my then spouse. And so I came home, I just waited. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a call asking me to come down to the White House and meet with the head of presidential personnel. That was a 12-minute interview. At the end of the interview, I walked out. One of the women who was in the interview said that we really need help. We really need help. I said, okay, well, great. You know, I'm there. Well, no, we really need help. I said, okay, well, I understand. I go back home. I don't hear a word. Not a word. For at least 3 to 4 weeks. I then read in the paper that, and you can look it up, that Secretary Tillerson was over at the White House with couple other people, and there was a meeting to discuss 2 people who were going to be appointed to the State Department. And there was a heated discussion, apparently, that went on, I later found out to be the case, about these 2 people. It didn't have my name on it, although I later found out, actually, that one of those 2 people was me, and that there were a couple people there that wanted me to apparently serve as Assistant Secretary rather than Undersecretary. And I think I understood that that came from the Vice President's office, and I understood that had to do sort of with who I am as a person. But I don't know that to be the case, and I never asked that question. And so it's, you know, I was only told about this after I left office. So that was sort of interesting, but I do remember reading that story. And the reason why I tell you this is because guess what happened the very next day? I was asked to become the Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy. So clearly something did happen in that meeting if you just extrapolate back, right? Or it was a very unusual coincidence. I get called. All of a sudden I'm told I'm going to be nominated. I get all this paperwork. You go through exhaustive clearance. You have to list all foreign trips you've made in 15 years. They go through every month, all the money, where it came from. So they're looking to see, are you blackmailable and are you living above or below your means? So you have to go through that. There's a long interview where they do sets of 10 questions. So to give you an idea, they might ask you, example might be, have you ever smoked marijuana? You might say no, yes, whatever the answer is, you shouldn't lie. So if the answer is no, have you ever smoked marijuana in the United States? No. Have you ever smoked marijuana in a foreign country where it's legal to smoke marijuana? No. If your friend said that you smoked marijuana at a party 2 weeks ago, would they be correct? No. Or yes, depending on what your answer is. And so there's sets of 10. So one might be about money, one might be about drug use, one might be about sex, one might be about work, all of those issues. And so you go through all that. My interview, my personal interview, well, first they fingerprint, but my actual interview took about 5 hours. And in the middle of it, I asked that the gentleman if he would mind if I went and got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my kitchen. But I have to tell you, that man had the strongest bladder I've ever met. He didn't go to the restroom one time in 5 hours. It was incredible. So, so that happened. Then you're nominated. You're actually nominated. You go before the Senate. You testify. My testimony is online. And the Senate votes on you. I was confirmed by unanimous consent, meaning not any negative votes. And you're sworn in, and I was sworn in on December 4th. So the Undersecretary of State for Public, and let me tell you, it is hard to explain to you what it is like when you are saying the oath of office. I just can't even tell you. I was starting the oath of office, and I said it very slowly, just to sort of remember what was happening. And I found myself getting more nervous and more nervous. And then when you were repeating to the person, right? So when you're repeating the line, "So help me God," which you don't have to say that, by the way. I said I wanted to say that, but you could choose to not say that line if you didn't want to. But when I knew when I said, "So help me God," I was going to be the Undersecretary of State. And I remember it so well going, So help me God. And I remember what that feeling was like. I don't ever want to forget that feeling, right? Because I'm never going to experience that feeling again. It's an awesome feeling, really. It's hard to describe to you. And then it started. So in that job, you're in essence, the chief branding officer of the United States overseas. You're not the chief spokesperson for the United States. That's the press secretary to the President of the United States. The chief branding officer. And all the public affairs people at state worked for me, including the spokesperson, and all the public diplomacy people. So there are people in every embassy that do public diplomacy on behalf of the United States. They go out and defend the United States using soft power. Words and books and buildings of things. AID, we build things. You know, we go try to talk to people. We might produce Sesame Street without people knowing it's necessarily from the United States. You know, anything to help sort of promote what we're trying to do. We don't tell foreign countries that they should adopt our form of democracy. That is not what we do. What we do is we try to explain to people why we do what we do, why we believe democracy works. And so most of what I did every day was go give speeches. I went down to the press shop. We have the second largest press corps outside of the White House at the State Department. A standing press corps that's there every day, whose job it is to cover the State Department. Talk to the secretary and others and find out what was happening within the government on that particular day. And talk to people around the world doing public diplomacy, trying to give advice on certain issues. So, example might be, we had a situation, if you recall, where the president allegedly referred to African countries as shithole nations. Now, the president said he didn't do that, and I'm not going to debate that point. But that created a big issue in the African nations. Obviously, from the ambassadors and the public diplomacy people who were trying to promote the United States. Some of the ambassadors were called back to meet with the head of country, they call that, to talk about, you know, why that was done. And I was very concerned that this was distracting for what we were trying to do. And so, on a plane with the secretary, I said to reporters who were traveling with us that this was not very helpful. Now, it served its purpose from a PR standpoint, in the fact that once I said that, the issue seemed to die down some. You know, I acknowledged what I believe was the obvious. But suffice to say, the White House was not happy with that particular line. And so, that is the dilemma that you face sometimes. You're appointed by the president, but you're working for a cabinet member. And what happens if that cabinet member's relationship with the White House isn't as perfect as you would like it to be? Google, we dealt with Google, with Facebook, with Twitter. I dealt with them quite a bit, especially Google, as it relates to foreign affairs and you know, postings of, you see all these postings that are up there that they're trying to bring down, and we're dealing with that. And so where does all that belong? There's always a struggle in the issue of foreign policy of who owns foreign policy. We believe foreign policy should stay at the State Department. But that's not always the case, because the president asked Jared Kushner to help handle Mexico, or to help handle the Middle East peace process. Another example would be, and then most days were perfectly fine, just exhausting. You get calls all during the night. You sleep maybe 3 hours or so, because you're constantly getting calls about what's happening in a foreign country. Someone throws a bomb, or I'm trying to think of the right word, but not, a bomb's the wrong word, by the way. But someone throws a grenade or some entity across the fence, and it lands in where the embassy is. Now, no one gets hurt, but you get notified about it because you're going to get press calls about it. And war starts somewhere, or somebody starts a problem. The secretary started every meeting with asking the same question, which is, how are we doing? Is everyone safe? Is everyone safe? So this went on for a period of time, and I can answer some more other questions later. And let me get to the last day, and then we can go to the point. So I didn't come to work on March 12th thinking that that was going to be my last day of work. The week before, the secretary went on a trip to Africa. I didn't go on that trip. I did go on the trip a couple weeks before to South America and to Latin America. So I did do that, but I didn't go on the trip to Africa. Because I was asked to go to London and speak at a de-ISIS event, which is called Defeat ISIS, to represent the United States at a de-ISIS event. So I did that, and I also went to the embassy, and I met with some people there. I did a couple of other events too along with that, did a number of interviews on television and radio and print and so forth. So, but I tracked the trip. I tracked the trip all the time. So I was talking to the plane quite a bit and sort of figuring out what was going on. And I'd gotten a call 2 days before saying there had been a rumor that the Secretary of State was going to be dismissed. And I asked and I was told no, that's not the case. So the Secretary landed at 4 a.m. at Andrews Air Force Base. So if you want to sound like you're in the know, they call that Joint Base Andrews, by the way. So JBA, if you're in Washington. So he landed at JBA at 4 a.m. I'm a rower, use Concept 2, I'm an indoor rower, I compete, not very well, but I do. And I use Concept 2, by the way. And so I was at a hotel, and down below they had, the health club had a Concept 2 rower. I got up at 5 a.m. and I went rowing. And for some crazy reason, and I really can't explain it, I rowed 14,000 meters, which is the most I'd ever rowed at one time. And I don't know why I did it that day, but I'm glad I did. Because when I got done, I was in an absolute laconic state. I really could barely focus. So I went upstairs, got dressed, went to work. 8:30, I was supposed to give a speech to PR people from African embassies, PR people who were in the African embassies. So I start my speech on Skype, and about 10 minutes later, two people, well, there's already somebody who works for me in the speech, of course, but two people that work for me came to me and went like this. And I'm looking at the screen, looking at this. You sort of get good at that. And because you're constantly looking around you trying to see what's going on. And so like that, and I said, speaking. And I came out, and I said, is my dad okay? Is my spouse okay? The Secretary's fired on Twitter. And I said, okay. Okay. Why did I say okay 3 times? So then I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to smile, because all the staff is going to be looking at us as we walk down the hallway. And we're going to go to the back elevator and go up the elevator. And we're not going to talk too much. So let's just do that. So we go up to the elevator, I go back to my office, and have you ever heard of the Marshall Plan? My office was in the office where the Marshall Plan, where Secretary Marshall, former Secretary Marshall's office. I get in there, there's 140 press calls on my phone. I had 2 phones. Somehow they got the other number too. 140 press calls. It's on all the TVs are blaring. So I thought, okay, we've got to do something. We've got to put out a statement. So I called the Secretary's Chief of Staff. So the Secretary's on his way in, and it's true. She gave me a statement. I said, I want to verify with the Secretary. She said, it's from the Secretary. We then tweeted it out. The Secretary said he did not know he was going to be fired. Thought public service was noble. Well, he didn't say that. I added that line in there, and I asked him if it was okay. We talked about the nobility of public service, and then we put it out. And then things settled out a bit because they all had to type the statement. And CNN's on, and people are in my office, and I look up and it says, Undersecretary Goldstein fired. And that's unusual. You usually don't find out that you're fired on CNN. And I said, well, that would be me, I suppose. So I said, well, will someone please call my dad right now? Because I gave them the names of 2 other people. I'm a guardian for someone named Jack, and I wanted him to know because he was in university, or he was actually in boarding school at the time. I wanted him to know, I wanted my dad to know, I wanted my then spouse to know. So I don't think people should hear that on television, right? And then I get a call, and they said it was Sean Ducey, Steve Ducey. And I said, Steve Ducey from Fox News, of the morning show? I said, I can't talk to him right now. And they said, no, maybe it's not him. I said, you need to go find out who it is, please. They come back and they say, actually it's Sean Ducey. I said, I don't know Sean Ducey, Google him. Head of Presidential Personnel. Or acting head of Presidential Personnel. I said, guess what? I'm going to be fired twice now, apparently. So I pick up the phone and he goes, hi, Mr. Undersecretary, how are you? Which I thought was the great irony. And very nice gentleman, really nice. Actually, although I heard he just left the White House. But he said, the President has relieved you of your duties. And I said, okay, well, thanks for telling me. And he goes, do you want that in writing? I said, I think I should, because it sounds historical. And he goes, it's only a line, so it won't take you long to type. And he goes, okay, yeah, I'll send it to you in writing. So I have it in my phone, by the way, if anyone wants to see it later. And then I get a call from the Secretary's office. And they said, the Secretary wants to see you right now. He has something to tell you. You're going to get a call. I said, well, the ship sort of sailed. I got a call. And it's on CNN. And now it's on Fox. And now I'm getting my own press calls. So then I put out a statement about, public service is noble, and, I'm proud of what we did, and that I hope to, my main goal over the next 2 months was to get a faster 2K time. Anybody row in here? I was saying one person. So you know what I meant. So my main goal was to get a faster 2K time, and so that's how you sort of judge rowing, by your 2K time. And so put that out, and that's a good PR thing to do, by the way, because then you distract a little bit and you start focusing on that part. And went upstairs, the Secretary said, I'm going to call General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, because you should not be fired. And I was like, oh, it's okay. I said, it's okay. You don't have to. No, I need to call General Kelly. So he calls General Kelly, and he says to General Kelly, in front of me, on a red phone, there actually is a red phone, just like you see in the movies. And gets General Kelly. He said, I don't think he should be fired. He did exactly what I told him to do. It was my statement. And he goes, yes, but he said, no, he's going to be fired. And he goes, well, I don't want him to leave until I leave. So he got off the phone and he said, you can stay. I want you to stay until I stay. And then I go back to my office and they go, but this is your last day of getting paid. And I said, okay, that's fine. But I wanted to stay with the Secretary anyway, because I didn't think he was being treated fairly. So that is what happened on that day. And I want to just end with a couple of points here. And I didn't talk about as many issues, and I will do that in the Q&A. So there's two things I want you to know. And this is really important. There are people that want to kill Americans, and Brits and others. They exist. And we can all sit around and sing Kumbaya, but they still want to do this. Some of them want to do it for reasons that you and I would not understand. Why would you behead a reporter in 2002? Why would you do that? Why would you go bomb an area that you know is going to kill certain people? It's very difficult to talk rationally to someone who has irrational thoughts, or whose way of life is different than our way of life. So part of it is trying to understand why people react the way they do. And the second thing, which is very important to know, there's always a negotiation. Oftentimes in foreign policy, the discussion is not about good versus evil. It's about evil versus really evil. And sometimes what you hear publicly, just because you heard it on MSNBC or CNN or Fox, some of what you're hearing is for public consumption. So a foreign leader oftentimes might make a very negative statement about America. Why are they doing that? What audience are they trying to reach? They're trying to reach, in many cases, their own audience, their internal audience. What they might say privately to us might be completely different. And so I'm going to give you two examples. One I can tell you about. I can't tell you the countries, but I'll give you these actual examples. We were in a Latin American, we'll say a Latin American country, or Caribbean country. We were in a Caribbean country, and we were having a talk with the leader of that nation. And we were telling that leader that Chavez was not a good actor. That Venezuela was a beautiful country and is not anymore. That he doesn't care about the people of Venezuela. And they needed to move away. We wanted Chavez out, and then he needed to move away from Venezuela. And this leader said, he gives me my oil, deeply, deeply discounted. That's the oil that my nation survives on. What are you all going to do? Are you going to do that? You going to give me money for that oil? It's not as simple as it seems, right? Let me paint another picture. There's a country. It could be any country. Here's the nation right here on my hand. Okay? I'm in a meeting and someone says to me, another country's invaded this country, and they're going in this far. And we're doing everything we can to try to stop that. And I said, well, why don't we just go in and say that's it? And they said, but it's not that simple. There's not an appetite for it in this country, right? I think you all would acknowledge there was genocide in Syria. Did you see any hue and cry from American people saying, let's get into Syria? People want us out of Afghanistan right now, and apparently we're going out of Afghanistan. So here's this right here. And the person says to me, our job is to keep it contained to this area, to not let it spread. I said, well, why would we do that? I knew the answer, but I just wanted to hear what the person said. And they said, would it surprise you to know that that country has been extremely helpful to us in the war on terrorism? No one knows, but they have been. And you can't discuss any of this because of clearances. And so it's never as simple. It isn't always what you see on television. We had a case at the department where, and I want to be careful here, where there was a gentleman who was going to be nominated for a position. And we pulled back the nomination. And the press inferred certain things about why we pulled back the nomination. But do you know why we pulled back? Because we found out that that person could have been spying on America. We didn't want to talk about that publicly because we wanted to keep monitoring. We couldn't tell reporters that. And so reporters just made their own inferences, which in some cases weren't correct. And I want to say the reporters that cover the State Department are phenomenal. And I also want to say one other thing. The people that work at the State Department are incredible people. Valued, strong civil servants who just want to do the best job they can for America. Many of them given their life for this country. So I don't buy that notion. I mean, you know, maybe I bought the Kool-Aid in that regard, but it was Kool-Aid worth buying. That's what I would tell you. So let me stop there. By the way, I came home. You might find this interesting. That night, the night I was fired, I was on every single television channel. What Stephen Colbert referred to me as Jerry Lewis, the comedian, go look him up. Rachel Maddow had my picture up like 2 or 3 days in a row. I couldn't walk around without people talking to me. But what was interesting, and it tells you a lot about how our country is right now, depending on your view, you ascribe to me your view. So if you were liberal, if you were a liberal Democrat, you'd come up to me and you'd go, good for you. You stood up, you fought against the president, and you stood up to the president. And I'd be like, no, I just did my job. And if you were conservative, I heard people talking about me in a hotel bar like 2 nights later. And they go, he's really not a Trump person. He's not. He's not. It's good that he's gone. It's very unusual to walk around and hear people talk about you, want to take pictures with you. And a funny story is, I was going on that Friday, I was going to Florida to see my dad, just to see how to make sure he was okay. And I get on the plane, I upgraded myself to first class, I thought no one will have any idea who I am. But that was a big mistake. I go to the bathroom, and I stupidly turn my phone over, and it had my business card. And I come back, and the guy goes, I know you. I know you. I know. You were on Stephen Colbert's show 2 nights ago. No, I said, no, I was not. You were on Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Fallon mentioned you. I go, no. Rachel Maddow? I go, no, I don't work for the government. Which, you know, was true at that moment, right? And he goes, I know who you are, I saw your card. So it's a very interesting dilemma that we live in right now. You know, try to learn the facts, try to find out as much as you can. Just because someone tells you something is true, don't always believe it's true. Go find out for yourself. Ronald Reagan had the best line, trust but verify. Trust but verify. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'll answer whatever questions you have. Did I do okay?